Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding Mishnah Berurah Chelik Beis, and we will be learning today Emir Hashem Daf Lamed Vav Amud Beis. We pick up today on Lamed Vav Amud Aleph Siman Kuf Nun Gimel in the middle of Sif Zayin. So, since the beginning of Siman Kuf Nun Gimel, we've been discussing the sale of a Bais HaKnesses, the sale of a shul, or the sale of other dvarim shebekadusha, like a Sefer Torah, an Aron Kodesh, a bima, Sefer Torah mantlach, Sifrei Kedusha, and the halacha that when we sell dvarim shebekadusha, we need to level up the monies, the proceeds of the sale. We saw earlier in the Mishnah Berurah that there is some dispute of whether or not you could use the proceeds of the sale for something on the same level of Kedusha as the item that was sold, or do you always have to level it up? And we're continuing today to discuss this question of selling a Bais HaKnesses and what may be done with the proceeds. Now, we already started Sif Zayin, and we did a lot of the Mishnah Berurah here on Sif Zayin, but we didn't finish. So I'm going to read from the beginning of Sif Zayin again in the Mechaber just to provide context, and then we will pick up with the Mishnah Berurah where we were holding. So let's begin Sif Zayin, 3 lines from the top, Lamed Vav Amud Aleph, near the end of the line. Says the Mechaber, V'ha de Bais HaKnesses nimkar. This whole discussion about selling a shul and the idea that we're saying that a shul may be sold, and then we have to discuss what may be done with the proceeds. Hani Mili, this discussion is only germane shel kfarim, when we're talking about a shul that's located in a small town or a small village, she'ein bayim anoshim mimekaimais acherim, where this small town or village is not a destination where people come from all over. Shaloi nasis ela lebnei kfarim levadom. When we're talking about a Bais HaKnesses or in a small town or a small village, then we assume that the Bais HaKnesses in that small town or small village was really only constructed for the use of the townspeople. And says the Ramah, Va'afilu bana oisa mishel acherim. This is true even if donations came in from outside the town or outside the village to help construct the Bais HaKnesses. V'lachein yechelim l'machrei. And that's why the townspeople are able to sell the Bais HaKnesses. Now, we saw a whole long hakdama from the Chavetz Chaim to Sif Zayin. We saw some of the Mishnah Berurah here on Sif Zayin. And just to give a very short synopsis of what we saw in the Mishnah Berurah, we saw that when we speak about the Bais HaKnesses of a small town or a small village, we're talking about a case where there's a town, a village, there may be people who come and travel through the village and use the shul in the small town or the village, but this town or village is not a destination unto itself. People are not coming from all over to come visit this town. Therefore, when the townspeople built a shul, we can safely assume that they built a shul for their own purposes. Since they built the shul for their own purposes, they have reshus to sell the shul, should they decide that it's time to sell the shul. Then we're going to have to deal with the restrictions that we saw earlier in the Siman of what may be done with the money. But they have the right to sell the shul because it's their shul that was built for their purposes. However, if we're talking about a town or a village which is a destination where people come from all over the Jewish world. So we saw, for example, the Mishnah Berurah said, let's say there's a gadol who lives in that town. Maybe one of the Paiskei Adar live in that town. So people are constantly coming there to seek the counsel of the gadol. Maybe there's a great Rebbe who lives in that town. So people are constantly coming to the Rebbe. Maybe there's a major marketplace in that town. So business people are constantly coming to that town for the marketplace. In any of those cases, that town is a destination where people come from all over the Jewish world to come there. And the people of the town or the village, they surely know that. Therefore, when they built their shul, we assume that they did not build it only for themselves. They built it for the entire Jewish world. In that case, the Mechaber is going to say, then the townspeople don't have the right to sell the shul, because it was built not just for them, it was built for people all over the Jewish world, who says they were maskim to the sale. So far what we saw in the Mechaber over here was, when are we having this whole conversation about selling a shul and discussing the restrictions of what may or may not be done with the proceeds? That is, like the Mechaber said, when we're talking about B'shel Kfarim, the shul of a small town, where it's not a destination where people are coming from all over. And therefore we assume that this shul was made for the townspeople. And the Ramah said this is true, even if they took outside donations. Because yes, people from outside donated to the cause of building the shul, but again, the assumption is that the people gave the money to the townspeople so that they can go ahead and build a shul for themselves. Why did they make donations? Because they have rachmanis on the people of that small town. They know, how are the people of a small town going to raise enough money to build a shul? We're willing to help them out. But it's for them, not for us. And that's why the townspeople are allowed to sell the shul. But we said that the money retains, the proceeds of the sale, retain their kedusha, and therefore ve'enam rasham lohiridon b'kedushasan. And that's why they're not allowed to level down the proceeds of the sale. If they have proceeds from the sale, they have to level them up. You sold a shul, build an Aron Kodesh, purchase a Sefer Torah. Now, right away, let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah, 2 lines off the bottom. Mishnah Berurah is Kalachav Zayin. Ve'enam Rasham, the Chavetz Chaim reminds us, Ayin le'el b'sif dalud, take a look earlier, in Mishnah Berurah is Katan dalud, yesh deyos imutar l'shanoisa l'kayotzeba. The Mechaber says over here that the proceeds retain their Kedusha, and you're not allowed to level them down. You're not allowed to be moirid them to buy something with lesser Kedusha. Right? But we saw a conversation earlier. Do you have to level the money up? Or could you keep it at the same level? For that, the Chavetz Chaim says, take a look back at Mishnah Berurah, Ois Katan Daled. Now, continues the Mechaber, and the Mechaber now puts in some caveats that we already saw inside in the Mechaber, but we didn't see the Mishnah Berurah. So says the Mishnah Berurah, V'hainu, when is this true? That if the people of the small town or the small village sell their shul, that the proceeds retain their kedusha and they're encumbered by the restrictions of Sif Beis, where they have to level up the proceeds. V'hainu, kishemachru b'nei ha'ir shaloi midas parnaseim. That's if the townspeople went ahead and sold the shul without the agreement of, for lack of better terminology nowadays, the board. If they sold it without the agreement of the parnosim of the city, the people that are charged with the responsibility of the iskei tzibur. If the townspeople sold the shul alone, so then the proceeds are encumbered by the restrictions of Sif Beis. V'huadin, or likewise, im machru shivet tuvei ha'ir shaloi b'may ben anshe ha'ir. Or if the 7 board members, if they went ahead and made the sale, but they did it shaloi b'may ben anshe ha'ir, they did it without the agreement, without calling a meeting and discussing it with the people of the town. If the Shivat Tuvei Ha'ir, and we're going to learn about who these Shivat Tuvei Ha'ir are in the Mishnah Berurah today, but if the Shivat Tuvei Ha'ir, like the board members of the shul, if they went ahead and they made the sale shaloi b'may ben anshe ha'ir, so again, then the proceeds are encumbered by the restrictions of Sif Beis. So far, the Mechaber gave us 2 cases. One is the townspeople sold the shul, they did the mechira without the agreement of the Shivat Tuvei Ha'ir, or if the Shivat Tuvei Ha'ir did it without the agreement of the townspeople. In those 2 cases, the proceeds are encumbered by the restrictions of Sif Beis. Aval, however, im hiskimu Shivat Tuvei Ha'ir ba'isay mecher, but if the board went ahead and made this sale, v'hayu b'may ben anshe ha'ir, and it was done with the agreement, it was done after a meeting and a discussion with the people of the city, then, says the Mechaber, Rasha'im lahoitzi hamois l'chol ma sheyirtzu. Then they could go ahead and they could use the money for whatever they want. So now let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah. Let's go back to Lamed Vav Amud Aleph. Mishnah Berurah is cutting Chavtes. Chavtes. Parnasehem, Shiva Tuvei Yair. Who are the Parnosim that we're talking about? These are the Shiva Tuvei Yair. Oiskat and Chavtes, Shiva Tuvei Yair. Kasav Arashba Chelik Aleph Siman Tafresh Yud Zayin Ve'Aviar Rashdam Siman Kof Ayin Hey. Shiva Tuvei Yair. These 7 good people of the city. Who are these? Says the Chavetz Chaim. Einam Shiva Anoshim Hamuvcharim B'Chachma Oy B'Oishe V'Chavod. We're not talking about 7 extraordinary people, 7 people who are chosen in their wisdom or in their wealth and their prestige. That's not what it means, Shiva Tuvei Yair. Ella, Shiva Anoshim, we're talking about 7 people, Sheha'amido Matzibur Parnosim Al Inyanei Yair, that were appointed by the Tzibur to be the Parnosim, to be the board members, to be the decision makers, Al Inyanei Yair, when it comes to Iskei Tzibur. V'harei heim ka'apotropsin aleihem, and they become like the legal guardians of the tzibur, and therefore it's like they have a power of attorney, sort of. They're the ones who carry the authority. They were the ones who were appointed by the tzibur to make the decisions of these kind of issues. The Kasav Oidsham, and the Rashba says further, V'im Taimar, if you'll ask me, what is this magic number 7? If the tzibur authorized these individuals to make these sorts of decisions, so why do we need a magic number of 7? Let's say they appointed 3 people. Umeshani Sham, and the Rashba answers over there a very interesting thing. He says, if you have individuals who are appointed by the tzibur to take control of specific issues and make decisions on specific issues. Kigoyin, for example, be'inyonenu, benegea to our topic, shebereru oisan lemechira. Let's say the tzibur picked out 3 people and they invested these 3 people with the authority to make decisions regarding the sale of the Bais HaKnesses and the use of the proceeds. Then, says the Mishnah Berurah, in the name of the Rashba, then you don't need 7, even 1. If the tzibur got together and they appointed 1 person, you are the executive board member in charge of selling the Bais HaKnesses and deciding what to do with the proceeds. In that case, you don't need 7. If they specifically invested him with that authority, then, okay, he's the guy in charge. He's the decision maker. And whatever he does, that is a decision, and you go with it. Elo Demairi, when we're speaking here about Shiva Tuvei Ha'ir, Elo Demairi Shehemidu Aleim Parnosim Bistam Lefakerach Aliske Atzibur. What we're talking about over here in our Siman, where we talk about the power of Shiva Tuvei Ha'ir, that's when you have a board that was invested with authority over all the Iskei Tzibur. They weren't appointed specifically to deal with the sale of the shul. They're the presidium of the shul. And they take care of a lot of things. They take care of the fundraising. They take care of the seats for Yomim Naraim. They take care of planning the shul dinner. They take care of planning the shul barbecue. They take care of the Kinyan Svarim. They take care... And also, if an issue is going to come up, negay with selling the shul, they're going to be the ones that are going to deal with the selling of the shul. But they were never specifically appointed to deal with the issue of selling the shul. In that case, says the Rashba, then you need 7 people. Lefikach, since they were never specifically appointed to deal with this issue, so then Kishahain Shiva, if there are 7 of them, Yesh Lehen Rishus L'chal Davar, then they are considered authorized to handle all things that will come up. Kilu Asu Kain Kal B'nei Ha'ir, and they stand in place of all of the townspeople. Even though they were never specifically appointed to handle this issue. But if there's less than 7 of them, if there are less than 7, then they don't have that level of authority. unless they go back to the townspeople and ask the townspeople to authorize them b'negeh to this issue. V'chein kasu kama paiskim, and many paiskim write the same thing. So now, what we have over here so far, let's recap. The Mechaber said over here in Siv Zayin, when we're having this whole discussion about selling a shul and what may or may not be done with the proceeds of the sale. First of all, says the Mechaber, realize that this whole conversation is only germane to a shul in a small town or a small village. In a small town or a small village, the townspeople are authorized to sell the shul because it's their shul, and the shul was constructed for their use. So if they decide it's time to sell, they're authorized to decide that it's time to sell. Okay, now, if it is a shul in such a small town and small village, it depends how they go about selling it. If the townspeople go ahead and sell it on their own without the agreement of the Shiva Tuvei Ha'ir. So we have a board, we have a executive committee, if you will, of 7 people, and the townspeople got together and they decided to sell the shul, but they didn't get the agreement of the Shiva Tuvei Ha'ir. If the shul is sold that way, the mechira apparently is a mechira, it's a binding mechira, but then the proceeds are encumbered by the restrictions of Siv Beis. They have to level up the proceeds because the proceeds retain Kedushas Bais HaKnesses. The same thing would be true if the board, the Shiva Tuvei Ha'ir, went ahead and made the sale without speaking and getting the agreement of the Bnei Ha'ir first. Again, apparently they're authorized to make the sale. The mechira is a mechira. Since they're the Shiva Tuvei Ha'ir, they have the right to make the mechira. But again, in that case, the proceeds retain their Kedusha, and since the proceeds retain their Kedusha, they're encumbered by the restrictions of Siv Beis. You need to level them up. However, then says the Mechaber, but if the sale is made by the Shiva Tuvei Ha'ir, b'maimad Anshe Ha'ir, it's done together with the understanding of the Shiva Tuvei Ha'ir, then, said the Mechaber, now the money loses its Kedusha, and now you could do with it whatever you will. We saw here in the Mishnah Berurah, what's up with this Shiva Tuvei Ha'ir? Pshat in the Shiva Tuvei Ha'ir is that if you have a board or an executive committee that was appointed to handle all of the Iskei Tzibur, so if there's 7 of them, so then they are significant enough that it's kind of like they have a power of attorney over the whole Tzibur. They act in lieu of the Tzibur. They are the representatives of the Tzibur. So that's why you need 7. You need Shiva Tuvei Ha'ir. If you don't have 7, so that depends. If you have 1 person or 2 people or 3 people, but even 1 who was specifically invested with the authority to make a sale of the shul and deal with the proceeds the way he wants to deal with the proceeds, then he's invested with that authority. You don't need 7. You only need 7 when this board was given kind of like a blanket appointment. They were never appointed specifically to handle this issue. That's when you need 7. Now, we should do Mishnah Berurah's Kat and Lamid. This is where the Mechaber said that if the sale was made by the people of the city with the agreement of the Shiva Tuvei Ha'ir, then then you could use the money for whatever you want. Says the Mishnah Berurah's Kat and Lamid, Aval, if it was done with the townspeople and the Shiva Tuvei Ha'ir, then all bets are off. Then the money actually does not retain its Kedusha. And now you could do with the proceeds whatever you want. Says the Mishnah Berurah, what does the Mechaber mean when he says l'chol ma sheyirtzu? You could use the money for whatever you want. Ritzayna loymar afilu le'ezer davar shel chayil. You could even use it for chulin. You could be mitzi. You could use the money to make a big shul barbecue. You could be mamish mitzi the money l'chulin if everybody agreed. Okay, now I want to take a look at some beer halachos over here. So if you turn back to Lamed Vav Amid Aleph, First of all, Bir Halacha Dibra Maschel V'hainu Kishamachru B'nei Ha'ir Shaloi Midas Parneseim. The first caveat that the Mechaber gave over here was, if the townspeople sold the shul without the agreement of the Shiva Tuvei Ha'ir, then the money retains its Kedusha, and the proceeds are encumbered by the restrictions of Sif Beis. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Nira de Dafke im Yesh Tovim Bo'ir. This is only if there are Shiva Tuvei Ha'ir. This concept, that if the Bnei Ha'ir sold the shul without the agreement of the Shiva Tuvei Ha'ir, now the proceeds retain their Kedusha, that's only if there are Shiva Tuvei Ha'ir. That's when we say that the townspeople are not fully authorized to make the sale, to the extent that even though the sale is a sale, remember, the sale is a sale, right? But the money remains encumbered because it retains its Kedusha. That's only if there are Shiva Tuvei Ha'ir. But what if this town never appointed Shiva Tuvei Ha'ir? There is no board. There is no executive committee. In that case, the townspeople are the final word. So if they sold the shul, not only is the mechira, but the money goes out to chulin too. So then it's as if the sale was done by the townspeople with the agreement of the board, because there is no board. And he says we could see this in the Chedushei HaRashba on Megillah. So again, this whole idea that there's a difference between whether the sale was done by the townspeople alone or by the townspeople with the agreement of the board, that's only if there is a board. If there's no board, then the townspeople are the last word. Now let's turn to Lamed Vav Amud Beis, Bir Halacha Dibra Maschel Aval Im Hiskimu. But if the sale was made by the townspeople together with the Shiva Tuvei Ha'ir, then we say suddenly that the money doesn't even retain its Kedusha anymore. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Mistimas HaMechaber, from the general way that the Mechaber writes this, mashba, the implication is, the Paka HaKedusha Memela Al Yedei Mechira Zu Me'adamim. If the sale is made by the townspeople with the agreement of the Shiva Tuvei Ha'ir, then apparently as soon as the sale is made, the money loses its Kedusha. So you have a shul, you have a Bais HaKnesses, but the tzibur, together with its board, together with its Shiva Tuvei Ha'ir, have made the decision that it's time to sell the shul. As soon as they make the sale, the Kedusha goes off the money. They take the Bais HaKnesses, they sell it, they get money in return. This money is now chulin. Even if they didn't make a tanai when they made the mechira. In other words, they don't have to say when they make the mechira, we're selling the shul, and the sale should be predicated upon the idea that when we receive the money in return for the shul, the money is no longer consecrated, the money has no kedusha, the money is chulin. No, they don't have to do that. Since the sale was made with the agreement of the townspeople and the board, automatically upon making the sale, the money becomes chulin. And he says, the Bir Halacha Akachach Matzasi B'Ritva B'Sugya, the Machru V'Isiru Shekasav Kebet Tirutz Abasra. He says he taka sees this in the Ritva, that's the halacha. Now, in the next Bir Halacha over here, he brings down a very interesting machlokes between the Masas Binyamin and something brought down in the Ramban. And what he discusses is like this. He discusses the question of what if the Bnei Ha'ir together with the Shiva Tuvei Ha'ir agreed to sell the shul, so they sell the shul and now the money goes out to chulin. Is that in every case? So says the Bir Halacha like this: Kasav Amasas Binyamin B'Tshuva Siman Lamed Gimel. V'zeu Teichen Devarav. This is a synopsis of what the Amasas Binyamin says. Da'afilu Shiva Tuvei Ha'ir b'maymin anshe Ha'ir. Even if the sale is made by the townspeople together with the board, they don't have the power to take the money out to chulin, only if they're actually selling the shul. Because when you sell the shul, so the shul had the kedusha, you're selling the shul, you're receiving money in return, so the kedusha went from the shul onto the money. The hadar paka kedusha gam midamim, and now the kedusha could leave the money to kalisha kedushasan, because the kedusha on the money is kalisha, it's weak. What does that mean? Well, what it seems to mean is the Bais HaKnesses has intrinsic kedusha. It's a makom tefillah. It's a place that's miyuchid to be mispal to the Rabbeinu Shalom. So it has kedusha. You go ahead and you sell the shul, you get money in return. So there's a vestige of the kedusha of the Bais HaKnesses that remains on the money. But that, says the Masas Binyamin, is kalisha kedushasan. It's a weak kedusha. So when the Bnei Ir and the Shiva Tuvei Ir receive that money, they have the power to be mafkia. They have the power to remove that weak level of the vestiges of kedusha off the money. But they don't have the power. The Bnei Ir with the Shiva Tuvei Ir, they don't have the power to just remove kedusha from a Bais HaKnesses just like that. What does he mean? Lefikach, therefore, im sasru Bais HaKnesses, if they demolish a Bais HaKnesses, or Bais HaKnesses shanafal, or you have a shul that never collapsed, adayin avonim b'kedushasayu kaimi, the materials of the building retain their kedusha. Va'afilu iskimu shiva tuviyir b'maymin anshir kulam loitzim lechulam loimahani. Even if there would be a meeting of the board and the people of the town, and they say, we want to remove the kedusha off the remaining structure, or off the materials of the structure, they don't have the power to do that. Unless they first build a new shul, and then destroy the old shul. Because then the kedusha goes on to the new shul, and the old shul goes out to chulin. And the Magen Avram brings down this Masas Binyamin. Mihu ein din zeh borer. Dezeh muchach rak l'shitas haran, because this only follows the Ran. Now skip a few lines. Aval ladasa Ramban v'siyatoi. But according to the Ramban and other like-minded Rishonim, mashban deshiva tuvia ir b'may b'nanchi ir alimuk chayu af b'limachira. They hold that the Shiva Tuvei Ir, together with the townspeople, have the power to remove the kedusha from a Bais HaKnesses even without a sale. The chol shehiskimu she'enon tzrichan loy oid. Once the Shiva Tuvei Ir, together with the townspeople, make the decision that a shul is no longer needed, yoytze lechulin memela. They have the power to remove the kedusha from the shul. And now you could use the materials of the shul even for chulin. Now, the main reason I wanted to bring down this biur halacha is because what we're seeing so far between the Mechaber and the Mishnah Berurah is a very fascinating thing. The people of a small town or a small village have the ability to sell their shul because the shul was constructed only for them. And therefore, they have the right to make decisions on what's going to be with this shul. But the question of the proceeds of the sale retaining their kedusha, and what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do with the proceeds of the sale seem to be determined on how the sale was made, right? If the sale was made by the townspeople alone without the Shiva Tuvei Ir, the money retains its kedusha. If the sale was made by the Shiva Tuvei Ir without the townspeople, the money retains the kedusha. But if the sale was made with the townspeople agreement with the Shiva Tuvei Ir, so the Shiva Tuvei Ir made the sale b'maymad b'nei ha'ir, they publicized it, they made a general membership meeting, so the board made the sale with the agreement of the Shiva Tuvei Ir. Now suddenly the kedusha goes off the proceeds. Why? Why? How did the kedusha leave the proceeds of the sale? So what we see over here is, it seems to be that when a sale is made with such a high level of authority, when it's the Shiva Tuvei Ir, b'maimed anshe Ir, so you have the board making the decision together with the townspeople making the decision, it sounds like the ones who make the rules have the right to break the rules. In other words, they are the ones who invested the shul with Kedusha. Once they reach the decision that for whatever reason, this shul is no longer needed, they have the ability to remove the Kedusha. They have the ability to sell the shul and take the proceeds and be mafkia the Kedusha from the proceeds. They could be moitzi the money to chulin. And we're going to see this theme continued now. Now let's continue the mechaber, the second line down, middle of the line, where we get to an even more interesting case. V'im kiblu aleim b'nei ha'ir b'ferish b'mecher zeh, if the people of the city were mikabel on themselves, they accepted upon themselves b'ferish b'mecher zeh, when it comes to this sale, kol ma sheyasa afilu yachid, if they invested the authority even in one person, but they invested specific authority, they authorized somebody, you are in charge with selling the shul, and whatever you decide to do with the proceeds, that's what we're accepting upon ourselves. Masha asa asui. Whatever this individual does is done. And he could mamish be mitzi the money to chulin also. He could do this without the Shiva Tuvei Ir, without Maimed Anshe Ir. He could do this as a free radical, as a lone operator. He was authorized fully by the tzibur, and we're going to see in the Biur Halacha that he must have been authorized not only by the Bnei Ha'ir. He was authorized by the Bnei Ha'ir and the Shiva Tuvei Ha'ir. Because so far what we saw is, the only time you have the right to be moitzi the money to chulin is when the shul was sold by the Shiva Tuvei Ir b'maimed anshe Ir. So how did one person now become so powerful? Because this person was appointed by the Shiva Tuvei Ir b'maimed anshe Ir. And they all accepted upon themselves, he's the man. Whatever he decides, that's done. He could sell it, he could decide what to do with the proceeds, so that he has the power of the Shiva Tuvei Ir b'maimed anshe Ir. So v'im kiblu aleim b'nei ir b'ferish b'mecher zeh, kol ma sheyasa afilu yachid, ma she'asa asui. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cut laman aleph, b'ferish kol ma ritzayna loymar. Ba'ofen zeh, in such a case, dinoi keshiva tuvei ir b'maimed anshe ir. This one person has the power equal to the Shiva Tuvei Ir b'maimed anshe ir. Sharashar machakach lo yitzi amos l'chol ma sheyirtzu. He could take the money out to use it for whatever they want. Kevin Shehirshu Lozeh, because they authorized him to do that. Avalim Nosduloi Stam Rishus Limkar, but if all they appointed this person to do was to act as an agent or as a broker to sell the shul, but they didn't give him the authority to decide what to do with the proceeds. If they authorized him to sell the shul and decide what to do with the proceeds, so then whatever he decides to do with the proceeds, he's the man. He makes the decision. He wants to make a barbecue with the money, he can make a shul barbecue with the money. But if they only authorized him to arrange the sale, but they didn't give him authority over the proceeds, then he doesn't have that rishus. Az hamois piktushas and kaimi. In that case, the money retains its kedusha. Now, take a look in Biur Halacha Dibra Maschil v'im kibul alei b'nei ir b'ferish. The Chavetz Chaim says, "Ayin me Mishnah Berurah Siv Katan Lamed Aleph l'chura kasha." L'chura, there's a big kasha here. May adifa kayach yachid sheminu lo zeh yosem iluhem atzmam micharu. How did this one person become more powerful than all the Bnei Ir? We learned earlier, if the Bnei Ir make the sale without the Shiva Tuvei Ir, the money retains its kedusha. How did this one person become so powerful that he's more powerful than all the Bnei Ir? Answers the Chavetz Chaim, like I told you. The Efsher, the Hakamayri, the B'nei Ir im hatoivim shalahem minu la'isa yachid. You have to say that this individual was appointed not only by the B'nei Ir, he was appointed by the B'nei Ir and the Shivatuvei Ir. That's why he's so powerful. But again, what you're seeing is that the whole idea over here is that if you have a sale that's authorized by the Shivat Tuvei Ha'ir and the B'nei Ha'ir in a small town or a small village, where they have the rights to make decisions over the shul, the power even extends to the ability to take the Kedusha off the proceeds of the sale. Because they invested the shul with Kedusha, they could divest it from Kedusha, apparently. But not the shul, only the proceeds. Or like we saw in the Biur Halacha earlier, that's a question between the Masas Binyamin, right? Is this only true according to the Ran? Is it true also according to the Ramban? I don't know. The Biur Halacha said Tzarachian Bazeh. Says the Ramah now, 3 lines down the middle of the line, Hagah. When we talk about the Shiva Tuvei Ir making a sale, b'maimad anshe ir. What does that mean? Does that mean that we have to bring all the townspeople together in an auditorium and the Shiva Tuvei Ir have to announce their decision to make the sale and what to use the proceeds for in front of all the townspeople? Says Rama, no. The chol Shiva Tuvei Ir moichre bepirsum, as long as the Shiva Tuvei Ir make the sale in a publicized manner, Mikri b'maimed anshe ir. That's called doing it b'maimed anshe ir. Ve'ein tzrichen loymar hein olav. It's not that you need a whole general membership meeting and they have to take a vote. Says the Mishnah Berurah Kat Lamed Beis, Moikrid b'pirsa b'tzayna loymar. The kol she moikrid Shiva Tuvei Ir b'farheskia. As long as the Shiva Tuvei Ir make the sale in a public fashion, v'loy b'tzina, they didn't get together in somebody's basement and make the sale. And then when the Shiva Tuvei Ir made the sale, nobody from the townspeople protested. Mikri b'maimed anshe ir. That's called b'maimed anshe ir. Points out the Mishnah Berurah, the tevas oilav shekasav haramah, when the Ramah said that if the Shiva Tuvei Ir make the sale in a publicized fashion, that's called that they did it b'maimed anshe ir. And he said, "Ve'enon tzrichen loymar hein olav," and the townspeople don't have to indicate either their agreement or their disagreement. Says the Chavetz Chaim, "V'tevas olav shekasav haramah shigra delishnahu." That's only a typical way of speaking. Ve'enon beduktik. It's not precise. What does he mean by that? What he means is, if the Shiva Tuvei Ir make the sale in a publicized fashion, and then people from the townspeople object to the sale, they have the right to block the sale. Remember, when we talk about the Shiva Tuvei Ir making the sale b'maimed anshe ir, that means that they're making the sale with the agreement of the townspeople. That's the whole point of b'maimed anshe ir. The reason a sale that's done by the Shiva Tuvei Ir b'maimed anshe ir is so powerful that it could remove the Kedusha from the Bais HaKnesses is because it's done with the agreement of the Shiva Tuvei Ir and the B'nei Ha'ir. But if the B'nei Ha'ir object to the sale, then the Shiva Tuvei Ir have no right to make the sale. So when the Ramah says that the people of the city don't have to indicate their agreement or their disagreement, he's being imprecise. They don't have to indicate their agreement because their silence is construed as their agreement. But if they would indicate their disagreement, then some Mefarshim say even one member of the tzibur has the right to block the sale. So it's not that they don't have to indicate their agreement or their disagreement. They don't have to indicate their agreement because their silence is construed as agreement. But if they want to indicate their disagreement, they can, and they can block the sale. Okay. Now let's go weiter. 2 lines to the bottom and middle of the line. So this was all in a case when we're dealing with the Bais HaKnesses of a small town or a small village, of a kfar. Aval shel krochim. But if we're dealing with the shul of a big city, sheboim sham mimekaymes acherim, where it's a destination that people come to from other places, Then afilu banu isai mishalahem, even if the shul was only built with money from the town, from the city, einoi nimkar, they can't sell the shul. Let's stop there for a second. They can't sell the shul. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cutting Lamed Gimel. Afilu banu isai mishalahem, even if the shul was only built from the monies that came from the city itself, they still can't go ahead and sell the shul. Says the Mishnah Berurah, "Tekevan de my alma asu l'sham," because since this city is a destination where people come from all over, mistama b'nei ir hikdishu gam l'das haneknasim. So then, when the people of the city built the shul and invested it with kedusha, they didn't do it only for themselves. They did it for the people who come to this city all the time. And therefore, they don't have the authority to go ahead and sell it and divest it of kedusha. They can't even sell it. Forget divest it from kedusha. They can't even make the sale. And we've got to be very medactic in the Chavetz Chaim's lashon over here. And he's coming from the lashon of a rush. Very tricky, and it's beyond the scope of what we do in this shir. But I want to point out how meduyik we have to be in the lashon of the Chavetz Chaim. Look what he writes here. See, I'll give you a heads up. We would expect, based on everything that we learned until now, that what the Chavetz Chaim would say is, if we're talking about a large city, which is a destination where people come from all over the place, so then the townspeople, the city people, have no right to sell the shul. Why? Because you built it al das everybody. You built a shul in Lakewood, which is a destination where people come from all over the place. So you didn't just build it al das the people of Lakewood. You built it for the people in Brooklyn. You built it for the people in Queens. You built it for the people in Yerushalayim who come into the United States frequently. And they know that they could get a minyan. They know that they could come to Lakewood to visit their kids or to come whatever it is that they're coming for. And they know that they have a shul to daven in. So you're not authorized to sell the shul because it's not your shul. It belongs to everybody in the world. And maybe it is somebody in Yerushalayim or it is somebody in Queens who is not masking to the sale. That's what we would expect the Chavetz Chaim to say. But he throws in a couple of words that throws us for a loop. Says the Chavetz Chaim, "Tekevan de mei alma asu l'sham," because since people come here from all over the world, mistama b'nei ir higdishu gam l'das hanichnasim. Mistama, when the people of the city built the shul, they built it not only for themselves, they built it for people who come here from all over. Ulefikach eilehem rishos limkar, and therefore they don't have the right to sell the shul. So far, so good. But look what he writes next. Shema yesh echad b'soif ha'olam. Maybe there's somebody in the end of the earth, somewhere, in Bnei Brak, in South Africa. Maybe there's somebody at the other end of the world, in Australia, in the land down under. And now come the tricky words. Shahaya samuch le'ir hazois, who used to live close to this city, v'ragel likanespa, and was used to coming here, u'ledaitei hugdasha, and the shul was consecrated with him in mind as well, v'hu eina maskim b'mechira, and he's not maskim to the sale. Whoa. Why does he throw in those words? Shahaya samech le'ir hazois, who once upon a time lived close to this city. What do we need that for? Oh, so he's coming from a rush. That's the lashon that the rush uses. And the achronim are medayik in the rush, that the rush says, wait a minute, we can only extend this svara so far. Are you really going to tell me that when they built the shul in Lakewood, they were makdish the shul al shem a yid in South Africa? A yid in Australia? Even a yid in Bnei Brak? And therefore they can't sell the shul without consulting everybody in Bnei Brak first? Are we going to take it that far? So the Achronim want to say from the lashon of the rush that cut it back a little bit. It's true. The people of the city aren't authorized to sell the shul because they didn't make it only for themselves. But they made it for everybody in the world. They made it for people that are not so far away. If it's in Lakewood, they made it al das the people in Borough Park. They made it al das the people in Philadelphia. If it's a shul in Brooklyn, they made it al das to people in Passaic and Monsey and Staten Island. Let's not go crazy. They didn't make it al das to people in South Africa. But the problem is, maybe there was somebody in Lakewood who moved to Bnei Brak. So now, even if you'll ask all the people in Lakewood, you're still not covered. Because there was a guy who used to live in Lakewood, so you made the shul in Borough Park, al das the guy in Lakewood, but now the guy who used to live in Lakewood moved to Bnei Brak, so you're not even going to be able to get his agreement. So the net result is that you have to get agreement from people all over the world. That's how they want to be medayik in the lashon of the Rosh. Again, I don't want to go too much into this because it's beyond the scope of what we do in this shir. But you see how careful you have to be. V'hu ein maskim b'mechira. So there's somebody who's not maskim to the sale. V'lachein, and therefore, afilu eskimu b'mechira shivetu v'yoir b'may b'danchu yoir. So when it comes to a big city, even if the sale is done by the shivetu v'yoir with the agreement of all the townspeople, ein mechirasan mechira. Their mechira, their sale, is not a binding sale. The inu loy kaifilu b'nei yoir leparnaseha. Because the guy in Bnei Brak, who you built the shul, al das him as well, the fact that the Shiva Tuvei Yoir by you went ahead and agreed to the sale, he's not bound to the Shiva Tuvei Yoir in Lakewood. He never voted them into power. And you didn't get his agreement. Even if you want to make the sale and then level up the proceeds, you still can't do it. You don't have the right to sell the shul. It's not your shul to sell. If it's a small town, it's your shul to sell. If it's a big city, it's not your shul to sell. Because you have other people that the shul was built for, and they're not maskim. But, and here's the big caveat that we're going to have to see for tomorrow's share as well. Even by a big city, says the Chavetz Chaim, v'chol zeh b'stama. That's only if it's a big city and a shul that was built b'stam. They got together, they built a shul with no preconceived ideas, with no pre-made tanoim. Avalin borulon, but if we know for sure, the loy banu el adaita de b'nei iron levad, if we know for sure that this shul, even a big city, but we know for sure that it was built only for the townspeople, Kigoin, for example, shehisnu be'es binyanam, that they made it tonight at the time of the construction. Or maybe when the shul was built, it was taka a small village. And then it grew into a big city. And nobody else gave money to the building from outside places. Even a shul from a big city. If it's no longer used, if a shul, even in a big city, is pashat sitting leidik, nobody uses it, it's abandoned, then even the shul of a big city could be sold. We'll see some interesting Dirshu footnotes on that tomorrow. But boy, this is a complex sugya, so we're already over time. We'll have to look at it in greater detail tomorrow. Thank you so much for joining me for Limud HaTorah. This was Limud HaTorah should be making against Klal Yisrael. Ron Shem should send Yeshua's Refuas, Shaduchim Parnasa to all those in need. And we should be zeicher to see the B'Yisrael Tzedek B'Meher V'Yameinu. Amen. Be well.